House Oversight Committee will finally get a chance to interview Hunter Biden's reportedly bestie and former business associate, Devon Archer. It's set to happen next Monday. Archer will reportedly testify that then-President Joe Biden, Vice President, I should say, joined dozens of his son's business meetings by speakerphone, something the White House has repeatedly denied. And now it seems a little change of message on the whole defense thing. Here's Press Secretary for the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, yesterday and last year. Watch.
I've been asked this question a million times. The answer is not going to change. The answer remains the same. The president was never in business with his son. I just don't have anything else to add.
Why is there a voicemail of the president talking to his son about his overseas business dealings if the president has said he's never spoken to his son about his overseas business dealings?
Well, first I'll say that what the president said stands. So if that's what the president said, that is what stands.
Oh, I tweeted about this immediately. Did you catch it? Critics did. They called it out, claiming the White House is moving the goalposts. She didn't answer the question that was asked. She didn't even try yesterday. It's certainly a sharp departure from this.
I never discussed a single thing with my son about anything having to do with Ukraine.
I've never spoken to my son about his overseas business deal.
Why did the Ukraine FBI informant file refer to you as fake? Why is that term continuously applied?
Why did I ask such a dumb question?
Are there tapes that you accepted bribes, President Biden? Is that true?
Where's the money? I'm joking.
Mr. President,
It's a bunch of malarkey.
You know, the problem when you're speaking for the president, and you've also previously said that you haven't really talked about that subject with the president, because that's how you scoot reporters along, then last week, over and over, Karine Jean-Pierre telling reporters, call the White House counsel's office, and then suddenly she has something to say, and the something she says is they were never in business together. We didn't ask you that. We want to know if they talked about those shady business dealings with foreign countries. The goalposts are definitely moving. The question is why. Republicans say the evidence is piling up, and Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy is now raising talk of a possible impeachment for Biden.
This president has also used something we have not seen since Richard Nixon, used the weaponization of government to benefit his family and deny Congress the ability to have the oversight. I believe we will follow this all the way to the end, and this is going to rise to an impeachment inquiry the way the Constitution tells us to do this, and we have to get the answers to these questions.
Ben Domenech, Fox News contributor, editor-at-large for The Spectator. When you hear the Speaker of the House with that language, impeachment inquiry, what comes forth for you?
Well, the first thing that I think is very important to understand there is that Kevin McCarthy is not rushing toward this. You know, we saw Democrats lower the standard when it came to, impeachment proceedings against President Trump in his time. And I think that clearly Kevin McCarthy is saying, we've got to find out as much as we possibly can before we kind of go down this road. But that is the road that we're currently headed down, because every piece of evidence that we seem to find adds to the idea that, Joe Biden himself personally was involved in many ways in all of these different business dealings with foreign partners, including foreign adversaries of the United States, that he's been dishonest to the American people about it, and that there are certainly ethical questions and potentially criminal questions associated with that. We're going to learn more from Devon Archer, but I think the key thing that you just said there, Harris, is the idea that Joe Biden was calling into these meetings, that he was on the speakerphone, talking to people in these meetings. What I want to know is, what was he saying? What was he saying to these people? What was he promising?
Yes.
What was he implying would happen if they didn't do business with Hunter Biden? These are all the questions that we have that are unanswered at this moment that we do need to find the answers to. And unfortunately, I think for the White House, that when we do find those answers, it's going to make the prospect of impeachment more likely, not less.
Well, look, I don't know if you stack up all the evidence, but maybe there's a clue. When the president, formerly vice president, was talking about getting his way in Ukraine and that a certain prosecutor could be fired if things weren't done the way he wanted them to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the things that we, should keep in mind is, dealing with all these different foreign entities, inevitably wraps you up in situations that can create conflict between American policy and what you are demanding of those entities at that moment. So it's one thing for defenders of the president to say, for instance, that it was American policy that we thought that this prosecutor was corrupt. Okay, well, how does that interact with the interest that Hunter Biden had and the way that he was getting money out of Burisma at the time? Where was that money going? Did it end up in the pockets of other Bidens, as it seems to have, given this network of LLCs that we've learned about during the course of this investigation? Look, for the longest time, the president, both when he was a candidate and in office, has insisted that there's nothing there, that it's a bunch of malarkey, that there is no unethical behavior or even a hint of it. And yet, as you were laying out there, they have clearly moved the goalposts on this. They've moved it into there is no sort of formal business relationship between father and son. That's a long way away from saying there's nothing here. There's nothing that we need to look at, and this is all just a bunch of malarkey.
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind with me yesterday when I was watching that news conference, or I should say White House press briefing with KJP, was exposure. Exposure for her if she's part of those goalpost movements. And this is really when the questions about impeachment start to come, because now there's a circle around the president of people you can put some pressure on. And that's what we do, those of us who cover it. With regards to the impeachment now, I want to talk about this. We know President Trump was impeached for the first time for his quote-unquote sloppy call with President Zelensky, who actually said there was no pressure or blackmail. In the Biden investigation, we have an alleged bribery scheme involving the president trying to squeeze millions from a Ukrainian company, a WhatsApp message claiming he was sitting with his dad as they tried to squeeze a Chinese businessman for cash. Devin Archer's reported testimony about Joe Biden on calls with Hunter Biden about his business deals. The IRS whistleblowers testifying that they were blocked from investigating anything related to Joe Biden. And, of course, Hunter Biden's sweetheart deal that's set to be put in and inked tomorrow. I mean, one versus the other. You've got days of time in a courtroom, potentially. Days of material, potentially, for an impeachment inquiry.
It's so much more material, Harris. It's so much more. And, essentially, what you had, with that first impeachment in particular, is you had a dispute between, an analyst who I think was too big for his britches in terms of believing that he led policy as it related to Ukraine and didn't like the president was breaking from his preferred policy, to a situation here where you just have a mountain of all sorts of evidence that is indicating really, untoward behavior on the part of the president and his son, and then the president defending his son, coming down on top of all of the different people who we trust to offer oversight, both from within the administration and on Capitol Hill. It's really abhorrent, and we can't accept it, Harris.
Wow, brilliant what you just said. People we trust. That's the problem. Ben Domenech, thank you very much.